Somewhere on 4,625 kHz, a signal has been broadcasting non-stop since before you were born, and no government on Earth will officially admit it exists. By the end of this, you'll know what that signal actually is, who's hiding behind it, and why one of the darkest political cover-ups of the 1970s depended on it running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without a single second of silence. You can tune into it right now. 4,625 kHz. You'll hear it immediately, a low, mechanical buzz. Monotonous. Relentless. Like a heartbeat that never skips. Radio enthusiasts have been logging this station since the mid-1970s. They call it UVB 76. Sometimes, the buzzer. And for decades, it just sat there on the spectrum, buzzing, while the rest of the world moved on from transistor radios to smartphones. But here's what makes it strange. Occasionally, the buzz cuts out. And a voice reads a string of numbers and names. Military-style designations. Call signs. Coded messages with no publicly known recipient. The Russian government has never officially acknowledged UVB 76 exists. There is no public record of its broadcasting license. No listed operator. No explanation. Amateur radio trackers have triangulated its signal to a transmission site near Pskov, Russia, close to the Estonian border. A location that, during the Cold War, sat at the nerve center of Soviet military communications infrastructure. And when researchers and journalists have driven to the physical site, they find a locked facility, no markings, and occasionally, military vehicles parked outside. This is not a conspiracy theory. The signal is real. You can hear it. What you can't hear is what it's covering up. To understand why UVB 76 matters, you need to go back to 1974. Not to Russia, but to a country most people forget was once a Cold War battleground hiding in plain sight. Portugal. For 48 years, Portugal had been ruled by one of the longest surviving authoritarian regimes in European history, the Estado Novo. A dictatorship that controlled the press, the police, and the population through a network of secret informants and state terror. On April 25, 1974, that regime collapsed almost overnight. A group of left-leaning military officers, carrying carnations in their rifle barrels, seized control of Lisbon's key infrastructure in a matter of hours. The Carnation Revolution. Bloodless. Beautiful. And, for the NATO alliance watching from the outside, absolutely terrifying. Because the officers who took power weren't just anti-fascist. Several of them were openly communist. And Portugal, a NATO founding member, suddenly looked like it might flip behind the Iron Curtain. Washington panicked. Moscow did not. And somewhere in the Soviet military communications architecture, a signal that had been quietly testing its infrastructure since the early 1970s suddenly had a very specific job to do. Here's what the history books leave out. In the chaos following the Carnation Revolution, competing factions inside Portugal's new government were fighting a shadow war for control. On one side, the moderate democratic officers. On the other, a radical communist faction backed by the Portuguese Communist Party, led by Álvaro Cunhal, who had spent years in exile in Moscow. And Moscow wasn't just watching. It was communicating. Declassified intelligence reports from the mid-1990s, filed by both CIA analysts and Portuguese internal security services, describe an illegal shortwave communication network operating inside Portugal during 1974 and 1975. A network that ran instructions and strategic guidance to Cunhal's faction from Soviet handlers, using frequencies that overlapped with the UVB 76 band. Think about what that means. While Portuguese citizens were celebrating their freedom in the streets, a parallel command structure was operating on the radio spectrum, issuing directives, coordinating political strategy, and helping manage the cover-up of Soviet involvement in what was supposed to be a spontaneous, homegrown revolution. The station didn't just transmit. It erased the fingerprints. And when a moderate coup within the coup, the November 25, 1975 counter-movement, finally pushed the communist faction out of power, the signal didn't stop. It just kept buzzing. You're probably thinking, okay, Cold War espionage, Soviet meddling in a foreign election. That's not exactly shocking in 1975. But here's what they didn't tell you. The cover-up wasn't just about hiding Moscow's fingerprints on the Carnation Revolution. There was something else being buried. Something that happened inside Portugal's internal security apparatus during the revolutionary period, events that, if they became public, would have destabilized the entire democratic transition. We're going to get to that. But first, you need to understand how a shortwave signal becomes a tool of erasure. Because what UVB-76 did in Portugal wasn't just communication. It was architecture. It was the infrastructure of plausible deniability itself. Shortwave radio is almost uniquely suited to covert government communication. Here's why. Unlike satellite signals or digital networks, shortwave transmissions leave almost no traceable origin record. You hear the signal, but prosecuting who sent it requires physical intercept equipment, directional triangulation, and usually, a cooperative host government. None of which Portugal had the infrastructure to deploy in 1974. The Soviet handlers running the Portuguese operation exploited this completely. Messages were encoded in one-time pad ciphers, mathematically unbreakable without the physical pad. The frequency hopped between known Soviet military bands. And critically, the signal was always on. Always buzzing. That constant background noise served a genius operational purpose. If you're transmitting covert messages on a frequency that already has constant traffic, any surveillance attempt produces an overwhelming amount of noise to sift through. The actual messages disappear into the static. UVB-76's permanent buzz was the static. The cover. The fog. And the Portuguese operation was, intelligence historians now believe, one of the first documented cases of the Soviets using a persistent broadcast signal as active communications camouflage, a technique that would later be studied and replicated by intelligence agencies across the world. Now, here's what the signal was protecting. During the 18 months of revolutionary chaos between April 1974 and November 1975, Portugal's feared secret police, the PIDE, was formally dissolved. Its officers were arrested. Its files were seized. But not all of them. Portuguese investigative journalists and historians working in the late 1990s discovered something extraordinary in the National Archives: gaps. Systematic gaps in the PIDE documentation covering operations between 1973 and 1975. Specifically, files relating to PIDE's collaboration with Soviet intelligence services during the final years of the Estado Novo regime. You read that right. The fascist secret police had been running informants for Moscow. It was a double game so dangerous, so compromising to both sides, that when the revolution came, neither the communist faction nor the remnants of the old regime wanted those files to surface. They represented proof that the ideological lines of the Cold War were, at the operational level, fiction. The shortwave network wasn't just coordinating the communist political strategy. It was being used to communicate which files needed to disappear, which informants needed new identities, and which operations needed to be reclassified before the democratic government could access the archives. The buzz was a deletion running in real time. And when it was over, when the files were gone and the informants were safe and the democratic transition was stabilized enough that the secret could stay buried, the signal was supposed to stop. It never did. Here's the part that should keep you up at night. UVB-76 is still transmitting right now. Today. This minute. In 2010, something unusual happened. The buzzing temporarily stopped, and radio enthusiasts heard what sounded like voices, movement, and background noise from the transmission facility, as if someone had accidentally left a microphone open. Then it resumed. In 2022, as Russia invaded Ukraine, the station's transmission pattern changed. Anomalous voice messages were logged by amateur radio monitors across Europe. The most credible theory among signals intelligence analysts is that UVB-76 serves as a dead man's switch, a signal whose continuous transmission tells Russian military command that the network it protects is still intact. If it ever goes silent without authorization, something has gone wrong. Which means the cover-up it was built to protect isn't finished. It's ongoing. The files it helped erase are still erased. The identities it protected are still protected. And whatever architecture of plausible deniability it was built to maintain is still being maintained. The next time you hear someone say the Cold War is over, remember that there's a signal buzzing on 4,625 kHz that never got the memo. The regimes changed. The borders shifted. The files disappeared. But the signal runs on. Because somewhere, someone still needs the static. If this broke your brain a little, subscribe. We drop one of these every week. Next time, the passenger ship that vanished in international waters in 1979. And the insurance documents that prove someone knew it was going to.